thank you for braving the elements. That's a gentle drop of spring rain that we had last night this morning, and the little bit of thunder and lightning that was laid on. So, in point of fact, welcome Helen exhibition to the gallery. It's a real pleasure to see you all here, and what I'm now going to do is to ask Helen Tiernan, the artist whose works you've already been admiring, to please give us the acknowledgement of country.
Yes,
Helen, if you can do that.
Hey, no, it's nice to see, put a face to the image as well. That's me. I don't know if I've got no theology. It will be an acknowledgement of the First Nations people of this place where we are now, this area, the Bunurong, and our neighbours, the Gunai-Kurnai people, all under the banner of the Kulin Nation, of which I belong. And respectfully, I want to acknowledge the ones that are past, the Indigenous people and other people, of course, in particular, my mother, who has been gone only just under 2 years, and she lived over 100. But can I tell you, she's with me every day. I shan't talk to you more about it. Max knew my mother very well when we were growing up in Sale in the country, even though she bought the shotgun out. So that's mother and present people, of course, and emerging. I want to thank the speakers that you'll be listening to soon, the Minister and Dr. Mari GEISSLER, my very, very amazing friend. She's about the only one in this world that knows my art very well. She's on my shoulder every day in the studio. So you'll be delighted to listen to what she's got to say about my art. And that's the highlight of my life, listening to somebody talk about my art. You know, I learn a lot from that. That's great. And also, of course, Lauraine Diggins Gallery, which I'm very privileged and grateful to be here, with Michael, Nerida and Ruth, fabulous, putting up with me and my little ladies. And also, my beautiful family here that always support me, and my lovely friends from, how many years ago? 56 years ago, from that end of the Victoria, the east to the west, from Geelong, Canberra, and they're here too. And of course, all these new faces I can't wait to chat to. So enjoy yourself. Please come and chat with me, talk with me, whatever you want to know. I'm very good at making up stories. So please enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mari GEISSLER, who is the great expert on Helen's work. Mari's background is that she is the Associate Researcher at the National Museum of Australia, as well as the Visiting Associate Researcher at the University of Wollongong. Above all else, can I recommend, if you get a moment, there is a book over in the middle gallery, which has recently been published by Mari. And this is a fabulous book on Indigenous art. It's the book that the market has long needed, so that it helps demystify an era which for a lot of people is difficult to comprehend. So what Mari has done is fantastic. I recommend that you look at the book, read it, and if you're looking to do some Christmas shopping, when you see it in a good bookstore, and I'm sure it's available in all good bookstores everywhere. Mari, welcome to the gallery, and would you please now delight Helen and tell us all about Helen's fabulous art. Dr. Mari GEISSLER.
Okay. Well, that was a fabulous introduction, Michael. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Minister, thank you, Michael, for inviting me here, and also your staff for helping me out many times, and of course, Helen, for inviting me to speak about your work, which I just love doing. Now, I'm a very passionate person about arts, so you know you'll have to stop me if I don't get going. I'll go too far. But you know, I really care that I help you to understand the material that you're looking at the moment. It really matters to me. There's so much for me to speak about in regards to Helen's work. I sat in the gallery with Michael and Helen 3 or 4 hours yesterday. We didn't stop.
We finished at 9:30.
And there was so much more to say about Helen and how she relates to everything that goes on in this gallery. And this is why it's such a great place for her work, because she is Indigenous to Victoria. There's so much about her that relates to the work that you represent, the early colonial work, the early Boovalos, Heidelberg School, which you know so much about and which you collect. And Helen, in a way, is one of these artists who just soaks all this up, and it's in her work. Now, how are you going to get to understand it? I've only got about, a short time to speak to you. So it's only going to be giving you the tip of the iceberg. So, but what I urge you to do is read this catalogue, read the captions, come back again later on, have a look, bring your friends, ask questions. There's so much here that's layered and interesting, and it's all about what Helen is about. I'll go more formally now into my notes, just that I don't get off track. So I've known Helen as a friend and colleague for over 15 years, and over that time I've come to see her as a cultural historian, but she's a visual cultural historian, unlike our visitor here, who is a writer. She does novels visually, and you do it in the written form. So we have people who make history come alive for us in a visual sense, and Helen does that. And she plays with us. And she recasts history in her own way, and she loves to play with humour and satire. That is always a sign of someone who's extremely intelligent, because they try to entertain us. They don't try to be dictatorial to us. And what I'm going to try and do is try and help you unpack some of the symbols and the terms that she uses in her art and in the history that she tries to give us. So for me, as an observer, what has always been fascinating with Helen is that the way she tries to give a sense of Indigenous presence in her work. Now, if you look at any of these works, you think, oh, yes, well. Now, let me stop there. Because it's not only Indigenous presence, she also gives us a sense of Australian history, in particular the black-white encounter. Now, who tells us about the black-white encounter? Who's prepared to take it on? We've got a lot of people who are making a lot of noise and making it violent massacres and all that. Helen does it differently. She lives it and breathes this history and how it's being portrayed. So what she gives us is a nuanced and complex history, and the incidents she highlights are often those in this era when we're looking to statement, the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We're looking at trying to get people on board with understanding Indigenous culture. How can we do this? How can we integrate this into our constitution? Well, Helen takes this on in her work in a subtle way. She asks for people to live respectfully alongside each other and to notice the humanity that exists for all of us in subtle ways. It's not with her. None of her work is about, look at me, it's subtle. So let's go to saying, why are you here, Helen? She's only just come back to live in Victoria after years away. She's been living in Canberra. She has been working at the National Museum of Australia with the collections there, deeply involved with the stories they're telling, the histories they're telling, and she loves all of that. And so what we see is in her work that she builds on all of this. But what's happened is that since coming back here, suddenly there's a shift, and we see in her new work, which is just around the corner in the next gallery, work that's inspired by Victoria in particular, and the influences that were there when you studied art at the Canberra School of Art. And these relate to the modernist painters in Victoria and subjects of more contemporary art, which we can go into later. For example, just around the corner over there is a a painting called Strangers. And you've got to go and have a quick look at it, but it's very funny. We see corpulent images of square cows. Now, this is a completely new visual device. Why cows, you might ask? Well, it's no doubt. Does anyone like to suggest why is she painting cows in the Australian landscape in Victoria? Anyone got a reason? Well, they remind us of colonial settlement. And they also, in the funny way that she's done it, she points to the exploitative farming practices that were introduced with settlement and the destruction of local Indigenous culture, fauna and lands that came with Indigenous settlement. We now live in a landscape in Victoria which is completely restructured by the European present, totally different. And the cow is a symbol of, you could say, the European. Odd, quirky people that came here, they didn't really fit in, took a while. And so she plays with the cow in the landscape, and you see these as if they're part of a new chessboard of the Australian landscape. And when you look at the one I was speaking about, called Strangers, what she's done is she's got two square cows, and they're actually provisionally taped onto a background of the landscape, suggesting they were provisional. We were here provisionally. And she's also having a little bit of a jibe at William Dobell, who did cows, if you know the art history, and John Kelly was famous for his square cows. I think we've got more cows to come from Helen. That's just the beginning. Anyway, at the same time in that landscape, we see this beautiful warrior form of a red gum standing against the cows, and it's sort of asserting the Indigenous presence that's there in the land, and it actually references the Heidelberg School and all that was done in those early painting traditions. So, moving along, her work is very accomplished technically, and it's got a virtuosity to it. It seems like there's nothing she can't paint. She's just amazing technically. There's detail, there's accuracy, you see flowers, people, trees. Around the corner there's navigational instruments, bark, canoes, clouds, riverscapes, whatever. It depends what interests her at the time and what she needs to use to get your interest. And most of all, she loves to paint country in all its manifestations. And along with this, she invests the landscape with encoded meanings. Recurring motifs are, over here we have these linear, reticulated, dotted lines. They seem to completely, if not smother the landscape, they sit above them. So what are they? We've got them over here, linking the sky to the sea. We've got them over there. They're almost like bars on a prison cell. We have them over there, sitting against, in front of the Australian landscape. We've got a marvellous Indigenous canoeist on one of the inland waterways. So what do all these mean? These refer to Indigenous songlines. Lots happening around songlines and how we understand Indigenous culture these days. Everyone's got a songline. But it's a metaphor for understanding that Indigenous people really feel that their culture is in the land. You know, it's almost an animistic tradition. It lives, it breathes, and they are connected to this. They can't look at a landscape without feeling engaged with it. It's part of them. I'm not saying that Europeans don't feel the same way, but this is part of how they see the landscape. And so we might refer to that web-like expression. It's a little bit like going to art history. It's like the entangled root forms of yams. Remember Emily's work? And these reticulate forms, they speak to the holistic expression of land that was in Emily's work, but also in Helen's. It's a storied landscape, and it's imprinted by Indigenous presence. But in Helen's work, we also get an overlay of European occupation. Now, how can you do that as well? Well, let me tell you. So what I want you to do is when you come to a painting like this, go in close, the ones in this room particularly, go in close, have a look. I challenge you to do this. And you'll see that the surface is not just flat, but it's highly embossed. So being of Indigenous background, skin has always been important. So the skin of the canvas is an issue for her. Skin, what does skin mean? Living as an Indigenous Australian. You've got lots of different heritage, I'll talk about that. So what she does is she slightly scars the surface of the painting with these sort of reticulated surfaces. If you're referring to Indigenous culture, what she uses this herringbone, or it's called a chevron or a triangular pattern. These are the patterns that we used for carved trees and used in desert painting. You see them often in traditional Papunya painting. You see a lot of this chevron work going on. So she reminds you that when you look close, the landscape is Indigenous by using this tactile way. But as well, we have this European settlement. And so when you look in close, you can also see patterns. Over here, for instance, you see, how would you describe that?
Well, it's patterns in the land, of course, and it's also what I actually use is lace, but I'm also looking at what Europeans brought with them to make their homes. So, and also my background in textile, feminine tact, but it also gives this a tactile quality to the landscape and the sky.
I'll make a few more points before I close because I'm going quite along. What we want to note is how to look at Helen's position within the Indigenous Australian art world. She is a bit like, I don't know if you're the artist Danny Malore or Brooke Andrew, and so like them, she acknowledges her Indigenous background, but also her Irish and her British background. That's really important. They're simultaneously there in her work. Other influences are a lot of historical influences, quite significant. Historians like Paul Irish, Bruce Pascoe, Bill Gamage, Dwayne Homaker, Lynn Kelly and Ian McLean. So that's just the beginning. And so to bring this to a close, because I've run over time, I think. You might ask, what cultural institutions have collected her work? Well, in 2014, a major work was acquired by the Parliament House in Canberra. And then in 2017, nearly the whole exhibition was purchased by the National Maritime Museum in Sydney. And these were expanding on her themes of navigational history. So come and speak to me later. And in conclusion, I would say to you, Helen TIERNA'S exquisitely painted, theatrically staged, dreamlike painting offers us much to consider and engage. I commend them to you. I trust you find them as exciting and challenging as I have. I look forward to your future work, and congratulations, Helen.
Murray, thank you so much for that. By the way, there will be a book coming fairly shortly. You've just participated in the book launch. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce my very dear friend, the Minister for Sport, Tourism, Major Events and Culture, and just about everything else that you can possibly imagine, Steve DIMOPOULOS. Steve DIMOPOULOS is here to officially open the show. Steve, I'll step aside.
Thanks, Mike.
My pleasure.
So it's a real pleasure to be here for many reasons, but I would also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present, including Indigenous elders right with us here today. I also want to acknowledge Michael, Nerida and Ruth in this extraordinary gallery. Good friends like Peter and Lior. I don't know if you know Lior, but Lior and I are both running for election in 35 days. And so Lior for Caulfield and me for the seat of Oakland. It's an interesting space of time, the next few weeks. But so with the arts, you know far more about the arts, I'm assuming, than I do, and you definitely know far more about it, as does this Michael and Nerida. But from a government perspective, there's a strong undercurrent of recognition that any society worth living in has a vibrant ecosystem of arts. It's extraordinarily important. I mean, to put an economic value on it, for Victoria's a fairly large economy. Just as a point of reference, it's twice as large as Scotland, Denmark. It's $100 billion bigger than New Zealand, twice as big as Greece's economy, which isn't a low it's not quite threshold, but the Victorian economy is a strong, robust and large economy. The arts, the creative industries contribute 8%, so about the same as mining does. So that's a feather in our cap, I think. We're not Queensland or WA. We have our people to contribute to our economic wealth. But that aside, 300,000 people work in creative industries, 8% of the economy. That aside, the more significant part of it is that it's actually about who we are, the stories we tell ourselves, as we heard, and the stories we tell the world. And that's so powerful, how you posture yourself as a society, how confident you are about your history, your present, and where you're going. No social change worth anything has been done without the assistance of the arts, without the leadership of the arts. And we can see this around us with Helen's work as well. It's not just stating what's here, it's stating a pathway to a change or a challenge for us to take up. That's the more meaningful part of the creative sector, and that's why I love this job. The public sector plays a big role, so we're building galleries into the contemporary, we're building a whole bunch of new spaces, we're funding a whole range of young, not necessarily young, but unknown embryonic artists. But there is a really critical place for private art galleries and the private market. It keeps the energy of the creative industries moving. It provides a space for artists who are extraordinary, who may not have a space in one of the public galleries initially and may end up there. But this is so important. Private galleries right around the state and right around the country are really, really important to the ecosystem of the arts. You know that. You don't need me to tell you. But I'd say that because I'm so proud proud to talk about Lauraine and Michael's gallery and now Nerida's gallery as part of that ecosystem that makes Melbourne and Victoria a global art city. And it is a global art city. Sometimes we have a cultural cringe around our own state. Anyone who does that, let's just leave that in the past. We should be a proud owner of the title, one of the global cities of the arts. And I'm talking about not just art as in painting, but all types of creative arts. So the private sector is an important pivotal part of that because it gives you opportunity in the space. For those reasons, obviously I'm very pleased to be here today when Michael Nerida asked if I could come and open Helen's exhibition. I only met Helen 22 minutes ago and I got a little tour of some of the pieces, and I don't have the right language, but this is just extraordinary art. Like, it's really evocative. There's already about 3 pieces that if I have the checkbook I'd purchased. They're extraordinary. So Helen, it is such a pleasure to meet you and this extraordinary art. And as Murray said, all the challenges that it asks us, invites us to contest, all the history and the contemporary experience you've got in terms of a First Nations artist, but also just an Australian artist more broadly. So thank you for allowing me, a novice, to open your exhibition and welcome home. the other reason I want to say that it's very special to be here is because well before I had this job, about 7 or 8 years ago, the first conversation that I had about art that really inspired me and excited me and educated me was at that coffee table over there, on that couch, with Lauraine and Michael and another dear friend, over probably a couple of glasses of Scotchman's Hill. And you can't overstate the curatorial leadership that both Michael and Lauraine have provided through decades to this country, both in the private market and the public domain, in terms of art procurement, setting a standard effectively, opening pathways, including for First Nations art. Lauraine and Michael were amongst the leaders of, before it became fashionable, in terms of, I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but they were there amongst the leaders at that time. And they've dabbled in the global market. These two, and Lorraine's obviously not with us, but these two have been extraordinary. So for all those reasons, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today at the Lauraine Diggins Fine Art Gallery to open the Helen S exhibition.